you expressed delight that the BLM hashtag transported, and this is a direct quote from you, Cathy, transported the rage of George Floyd's death across the four corners of the globe.
Zia,
so
I've said
the point
to
that we
you,
are making
Zia,
is that
I've said to you,
totally
I understand
different
people
reaction.
are angry.
Hey everyone, welcome back to Julian Discourse. Have you ever noticed that the mainstream media loves public outrage when it fits their progressive agenda, but immediately calls it dangerous the second it exposes their own institutional failures? In this explosive clip, watch Reform UK's Zia Yusuf absolutely dismantle host Cathy Newman on live TV. When she tries to shame him for calling out the horrific reality of two-tier policing in the tragic Henry Nowak case, Zia flips the script and exposes her massive George Floyd hypocrisy. Hit subscribe and let's watch the establishment narrative completely collapse in real time.
Question. It's absolutely heartbreaking, and that is why the family said they wanted to turn that into something that would not create more division. I'm asking you if Nigel Farage suggesting to people that they feel cold, pure cold rage, is that inciting people to feel anger?
Well, Cathy, you have not answered my question, which is what emotion did you feel having watched that body cam footage?
I'm interviewing you, so I would like you to ask that question. Is that incitement or not? It's simple.
Okay, well, I will tell you, having watched that footage myself, I was furious about it. I think millions of people in this country of all sorts of races and religions, based on the people who are speaking to me and sending me messages constantly, they were absolutely furious about it as well, because it was a crystal clear example of two-tier policing. And how on earth the police, upon attending the scene, took more seriously an accusation of racism than an accusation of having been stabbed. Paul Henry
police,
said repeatedly to the police, that I've been stabbed. And the police said, and this is burnt into my memory now, it's so horrifying, the police responded with, I quote, "I don't think you have, mate." So the burden of proof was on Henry to prove that he had been stabbed, and yet there was no burden of proof on the murderer who had accused Henry of racism. And if that doesn't make you angry,
if I could just ask a question, because otherwise we're not. This is supposed to be a conversation. I'm not saying that I'm not angry. My heart is broken for the family, of course, and it is enraging. Are you happy with him using that phrase?
Cathy, what Nigel Farage said today was that white lives matter as much as black lives. Do you disagree with that statement?
You seem to be conducting an interview with me, but I'm trying to ask you the question.
I'm asking you whether you disagree with the statement.
Because you're the politician.
I'm correcting, with respect, Cathy, I'm correcting you on this, because to leave out the second half of the sentence, I think is deliberately misrepresentative and misleading. So Nigel said that white lives matter as much as black lives. And my question to you is, do you disagree with that statement?
And my question to you is about Nigel Farage's claims of anti-white prejudice. I mean, there is overwhelming evidence, isn't there, of police racism over the decades against black minority ethnic people. You've got to go back to the Scarman Report, the Macpherson Report, the Casey Review. There are decades of racism by the police against black minority ethnic people. Do you accept that that is a fact?
I'm kind of stunned that you couldn't bring yourself to say that you agree with the statement that white lives matter as much as black lives. I can't understand why you can't just confirm you agree with that statement.
Zia, you're the senior member of a party. You're a politician. My job is to hold you to account, so I'm asking you these questions. And I would love you to answer that question about racism against black and minority ethnic people by the police. There are a lot of people who are angry because they see every day, you know, the stop and search data. They see that. They see the deaths of black people in police custody. And they're saying, where is your anger about that?
Well, again, I don't understand why you can't bring yourself to confirm that you agree with the statement that white lives matter as much as black lives. Clearly, it is unacceptable for anyone to be discriminated against based on immutable characteristics by the police or anybody else. But, you know, Cathy, you've been conducting this interview on a premise that it is wholly inappropriate to watch that body cam footage and be furious. It is wholly inappropriate to conclude from watching that body cam footage that there should be some political ramifications for this. When in 2021, Cathy, you wrote op-ed after op-ed, article after article in newspapers like The Independent about George Floyd. In fact, and let me quote you your own words. You said that you were you expressed delight that the BLM hashtag transported, and this is a direct quote from you, Cathy, transported the rage of George Floyd's death across the four corners of the globe.
Zia,
so
I've said
the point
to
that we
you,
are making
Zia,
is that
I've said to you,
a totally
I understand
different
people
reaction,
are angry,
a totally
but
different reaction, a totally different reaction, Cathy, not just from you. I'm only putting that to you because I'm speaking to you now, but I'm afraid this has been endemic across most of the media landscape in this country and the institutions in this country. And the reality is this: because Henry
Zia, may I
was a
just
white
respond
man,
to that
because
point?
Henry was a white man,
Zia,
because Henry was a white
Zia,
man,
you seem to be
people are
interviewing
simply
me,
unwilling
but
to accept that this sort of thing exists.
Zia, I can see you're on broadcast mode, but if you'd listened to my monologue at the start of this show, I know you were on a rival show, so that was impossible for you. But I reflected on the public anger and the anger that people feel. But I also reflected on the concerns that MPs have, including the constituency MP of Henry Nowak, who is worried about that anger being stoked by politicians for their own ends, for political ends. I'm asking you about that. I'm reflecting on that. But I would also like to ask you about racism in the police, which we've just talked about. I mean, I wonder whether you think 92% of police officers in England and Wales are white. Do you think they are going to be guilty of systematic prejudice against white people? Do you think that's likely?
Not only is it likely, it's demonstrable. You can go to Hampshire Police's website as we speak. You can read their, quote, race action plan that, by the way, was brought into being under a Tory government. And what that does is make crystal clear that the police must prioritize accusations of racism. And this is why it's actually really important, Cathy, because you're talking about the politicization of this. The reality is that the only way we are going to prevent systematic racism against any race or any religion inside the police is through political action. I'm sure you agree with that because you've expended considerable amounts of your own energy in pursuit of that, but it only seems to be in one direction.
Zia, you know, this is a bit like this interview, but you know the police action plan was brought in to address decades of racism against black and minority ethnic people by the police. So that was why it was to correct an imbalance there that had lasted for decades. Do you accept that that was necessary?
Legislation and initiatives like that must be judged on the impact that they have and the outcomes that they create, not the intentions of those that created them. I'm not impugning the intentions of the people who created all of that, but what is crystal clear is that what we saw in that harrowing, distressing, and tragic body cam footage is directly downstream. And anyone watching this, whether you agree with the reform or not, I encourage you to go and read the race action plan on Hampshire Police's website. Go and read that in full. It's not a particularly long page, but there's a lot there. And what it makes crystal clear is that the reaction of the police, the fact that that footage proves that the burden of proof for a man making an accusation of racism was zero. Henry was arrested pretty much immediately, even as he was bleeding to death. Yet the burden of proof for Henry in saying repeatedly that I've been stabbed was such that the police responded as he bled to death by handcuffing him and saying, I don't think you have, mate. And Cathy, I put it to you as you know, human to human, if you can't see that as evidence of anti-white discrimination in the conduct of those attending officers, then I'm afraid we cannot be have been watching the same footage.
Zia, I'm just...
What you just watched isn't simply a television debate. It is the absolute collapse of the mainstream media's moral authority. When Cathy Newman sat in that studio, she wasn't acting as an objective journalist. She was acting as an institutional gatekeeper, desperately trying to shame the British public into silence for simply daring to notice what is happening in their own country. Zia Yusuf brilliantly exposed the terrifying reality of what modern law enforcement has become. To understand how we arrived at a point where police officers will handcuff a bleeding, dying 18-year-old boy while prioritizing a fake accusation of racism from his killer, you have to look at the history of institutional capture. It traces back to the 1999 Macpherson Report, which injected the concept of institutional racism into UK policing. This ideological capture went into absolute overdrive following the Black Lives Matter protests in the summer of 2020. With the rollout of initiatives like the Police Race Action Plan, officers have been systematically conditioned to view every interaction through the lens of identity politics. The devastating consequence of that progressive ideology was captured on that horrific bodycam footage. Henry Nowak's final moments were spent handcuffed by the state, simply because his attacker knew exactly which progressive buzzword to deploy to make the police freeze. Look at the undeniable hypocrisy here. Back in 2020, commentators like Newman wrote articles actively celebrating the global rage surrounding George Floyd. Yet today, in 2026, when working-class citizens express completely justified anger over an innocent teenager being failed by a two-tier justice system, the media suddenly labels that anger as dangerous incitement. They aren't afraid of public anger, they are afraid they can no longer control the narrative. Thank you for watching Julian Discourse. If you refuse to let the establishment media dictate how you are allowed to feel, hit that subscribe button, leave a like, and I'll see you in the next one.